Hello, everyone joining. We're going to give it a few minutes to allow attendees to join, and we will get started. Looks like we're about at a steady number with the attendees. If you're comfortable and ready to go, you're good to go.
Great, thank you very much. So hello everyone, and welcome to this ambitiously titled session on how to double your Speak Up reports almost overnight. Now, I have a confession to make up front. I may have used a little bit of artistic license to grab your attention and to get you to join this webinar, but I can confirm that we have significantly increased our Speak Up reports in Royal Mail. So this session will talk you through what we did and the lessons we've learned. So my name is Karen Nightingale. I am Director of Compliance and Ethics at Royal Mail in the UK. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Jamin Patel. I will let him introduce himself in a moment, but he's going to help by looking after the Q&A function for me, launching the polls. So please do feel free to ask your questions as we go along. We will be pausing at various points in the session to look at those questions. And if we've got time, we will do a Q&A session at the end of the session. So just a little bit of background about myself. I am an antitrust and regulatory lawyer by training. Before I joined Royal Mail, I worked at BT, which is the UK's incumbent telecommunications company. And then I joined Royal Mail's legal team in 2016. Then in 2019, an opportunity came up to move over to the compliance team, and I became head of that team in April 2020. The team deals with a range of compliance risks, such as anti-corruption and bribery, competition law, antitrust law, sanctions, modern slavery, and of course, we own the Speak Up helpline. And I have to say, I've never looked back. I really enjoy my role in the compliance and ethics team, and I particularly enjoy looking after Speak Up. It's such an important part of a successful business. So over to you, Jamin.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamin Patel. I started my career in the compliance team of a Japanese bank. I then got involved into compliance training. That was with a specialist learning consultancy on governance, risk and compliance. I then combined those two roles when I moved over to Karen's team in Royal Mail, where I now head up the training and communications function. As Karen said, I'll be moderating everything today, so please feel free to use the chat and poll functions if you want to get in contact with us.
Great, so thanks, Jamin. So we're going to start off with a bit of an icebreaker as a way to get everyone used to using the chat function. So you'll see on the slide on the left-hand side, there's a few facts and figures about Royal Mail. You can see that it is a big company in the UK. And on the right-hand side, just some photos from when we were in serious lockdown. Most people working from home, couldn't leave their houses very much, but our postmen and women were out there every day, delivering mail, delivering COVID testing kits, so playing a really important role in the community. And what we saw was a very genuine outpouring of gratitude for our postmen and women, and that was really heartwarming. So question, we've got all these facts and figures, but how old is Royal Mail? And I will give you a couple of clues. It is old, and we're looking for answers in the hundreds, not in the tens. So please just have a go, just a bit of fun, put your answer in the chat function and we'll have a look if anyone got close. So while you're all doing that, I'm going to start with a story of my first experience that I can think of around speaking up. And so it was several years ago. I was a junior lawyer. I was working at a big company, and someone in the business told me about an accounting practice that was going on where revenue was being booked to the business before it had actually been received. Now, I was concerned about that because in the UK, there had been a similar case where a big supermarket chain had got in trouble for doing the same thing. So I raised it with a senior person in the legal team, and they actually laughed when I raised it. And that was obviously not the reaction that I was expecting. I must have pulled a bit of a face, must have looked a bit shocked, because he then sort of pulled himself together and said, oh, yes, no, that doesn't sound very good. Leave it with me. And guess what? I never heard anything again. But equally, I did not raise that report to anyone else. I didn't use the Speak Up helpline. And looking back, I don't even think I was aware there was a Speak Up helpline at that point. So you can see there's lots of things wrong with that situation. Now, I'm not saying that the outcome would have been any different if I had phoned the Speak Up helpline. You know, it all came out eventually. The company got some very serious fines. It suffered some very significant reputational damage. And there's even some criminal prosecutions for individuals in certain jurisdictions. So that wouldn't necessarily have changed, but I would not want a similar situation and a similar response to happen at Royal Mail. So we have worked really hard in the team to make sure that doesn't happen. So back to the icebreaker, the answer is that Royal Mail was started in 1516 during the reign of Henry VIII. So we are 506 years old, so something to be proud of. Jamin, did anyone get anywhere close to that?
Yeah, we got a few 500s. So Jennifer, Jurga, Andreen, Jan. But the very first answer was actually 500 plus years. So Evelyn did well, answered it straight away.
Brilliant. So well done.
And we did get one exactly 506. So
do we think that person looked it up on Google? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for that, everyone. So now let's move on. So a bit of background. The Speak Up helpline, the ownership of it moved over to my team in November 2020. Previously, it had sat with internal audit and then it sat with security, but really it made sense for it to sit with compliance and ethics, its spiritual home, if you like, because obviously speaking up is such a key part of an ethical culture. So it made sense to bring the two things together. Royal Mail had had a Speak Up helpline for many years. But I think it's fair to say it hadn't had the love and the attention that it deserved. So as a team, we decided to focus on it in 2021 and really raise the profile of it. So the first thing that we did was replace our quite dated existing Speak Up helpline with a new platform. So we spent several weeks configuring it, getting it exactly how we wanted it. And it's really, really good. We can manage the entire end-to-end process all on the platform. So from the initial report coming in, triaging, allocating to an investigator, investigation reports coming back, closing a case and then feeding back to the reporter. So that now is a very secure process. It's a very confidential process. It avoids the need for emailing documents or having Outlook folders, keeping evidence, for example. So people now can trust the process a lot more. They can trust that their details are going to be protected. So that's really important. And also added benefit is that the platform gives us a lot more information, and I will talk about that later about how we use that information. So we've got a shiny new platform ready to launch, but there are a few practical issues. First of all, the first one is how do we get those new Speak Up details out there? We've got a new phone line, we've got a new web address, we've got a new strap line, but the old details are everywhere. They are on the intranet, they are in policies, they're in guidance documents, they're on posters. So we've got to make sure that those are all removed. We've also got a large operational workforce and they don't have access to work laptops or mobile phones or email addresses. They don't do our online learning. They're extremely busy with COVID at this point. Don't forget, this is April 2021. So how do we communicate with them? So that is the first issue. The second issue is that although there was good awareness of the existence of the helpline, as I said, it's been around for several years, I don't think there was much awareness of how the process actually worked from start to finish. So what happens once you make a report? Who looks at it? Do you ever hear about it again? And that lack of transparency can create distrust, which then stops people reporting concerns. So we had to get over that. Oh, gone too far. Third, historically, there had been a focus on the Speak Up helpline as being there to report serious misconduct. And I think that's probably a reflection of where it sat in the business before. Now, of course, that's perfectly correct. You should be able to report serious issues to the Speak Up helpline. But in my view, people should also be able to report anything that's concerning them that they can't report elsewhere, whether that's unethical behaviour or something that might look pretty small. Remember, small things, reporting small things stops them turning into big things, which can then get out of control. And the final issue was, we know from previous ethical culture surveys that we've done that 73% of people said that they would report an issue to their line manager as their first report. And that's not unusual. I'm sure that happens in lots of businesses, rather than the Speak Up helpline. But the issue we had was that there was no training, there was no guidance, there was no support out there for those managers on how to do this. So even things like how to recognize when a concern is being raised to them, how do they then deal with that concern? And how do they reassure the reporter that they're going to look at it and treat it confidentially? Now, all of those things are critical. How a manager deals with an issue will affect how that employee sees their company's culture. Are they being listened to? Is action being taken? Are they being taken seriously? And if that first experience is not positive, then they won't bother raising a concern next time. And it's very likely that they will then share that poor experience with their colleagues. So we all know bad news travels fast. Every person that has a bad experience, they will tell 10 colleagues, who will tell another 10 colleagues, and then it becomes almost like an urban myth, if you like, that it's not worth speaking up. So what did we do? Let's have a look at each of these in turn. So first of all, communicating the new helpline details. But before we get onto that, we're going to launch the first poll. So Jamin, can you take us through that, please?
Okay, so the poll is now live in the chat function. So you just hit vote now. The question is, do you currently provide training for managers around speaking up? Once you hit vote now, there are
it's
three
not
options.
that one. No, sorry, it should be the reporting.
Was it the other one?
Yep, sorry.
Let me change that.
Getting ahead of ourselves.
Let's try again. Okay. Okay. Sorry, let's start again. So it says, are you currently... Oh my God. Okay. So are you currently satisfied with the level of speak up reports your company receives? And hopefully that screen will refresh in a second to provide the right poll question. And then we'll look to take answers from there. If you just refresh your screens, it should update now. So it's got the right poll question in there.
Is it working?
It's loading now, and hopefully we should have something up there. And okay. It should say, are you currently satisfied with the level of speak up reports your company receives? Yes, I'm very satisfied. Yes, I'm somewhat satisfied. No, I feel we should be getting more reports. No, I feel we should be getting a lot more reports, and my company currently doesn't have a speak up process. So hopefully you can all see that now and answer that poll. Okay. Yeah, that poll is now live. Apologies for the issues there.
So if everyone could just take 30 seconds to answer that, and then we'll have a look at the results and see what people are saying.
Okay. Yep. The results are updating as we speak.
Do we have any results?
At the moment, we've got no, I should be getting more reports as top of the list. So if people can continue to vote on the poll, and then we can see what the answers are like in sort of 30 seconds time.
Okay, I will continue then and jump in, Jamin, at some point when we've got a reasonable level of responses. So that's interesting because that's exactly the place that Royal Mail was at when we started this journey. We had what I knew to be a low level of reporting. We were well below benchmarks, and so we were very keen to increase those levels, which may sound counterintuitive, but more reporting doesn't mean more misconduct. It just means more people are reporting misconduct. That's probably happening anyway. And each report gives you more information. It tells you what's going on in the business. So it's a very valuable thing to have. So what did we do to get those new details out there? So as I said, we have a very large and very diverse workforce. So the key was to use as many different formats and as many different channels as possible to reach the maximum number of people. So the first thing that we did, and the easiest thing we did, was send an email out to everyone who has an email address with the new details. And that needed doing, and it was supported by a senior leader. It's a good example of tone from the top. Not necessarily the most effective way of getting key updates out to people, but it's certainly very quick and easy. But as I've said, not everyone has an email address. It's very easy to delete an email if you're busy at that moment without reading it, or you file it somewhere and you can't find it later. If you don't need to make a report at that precise moment, then you might not retain that information. So to get over that and to really focus on our operational colleagues, we got new posters printed out for all of our sites, which is not necessarily as easy as it sounds. We have got over 1,500 sites across the country. Those sites are sometimes moving around. You've got to keep up with those addresses. You've got to know how many people at the site to work out how many posters to send. So not straightforward. We've added a QR code to that poster so that people can just scan that. And actually we use the QR code whenever we're sort of promoting the helpline. Just makes it as easy as possible for people to make a report. We also use the plasma TV screens that are in all operational sites. So those screens are playing constantly, and that's a good way to reach operational colleagues to at least let them know that the details have changed. And then we had an article published in the Courier, which is our internal newspaper. Again, it's more aimed at operational colleagues, so another way of reaching those people. We had some wallet cards printed out. So you've got the details of this helpline on one side and then space on the back to write to your unique case reference. Every reporter gets a unique case reference and a unique password. Word of warning, if you're going to do that, don't make the mistake that we made first of all, which is to put space on the back to write both the case reference and the password. They should never be written down together. And the reason for that is if that card falls out of your pocket, whoever picks it up can then log in and access potentially some very sensitive information. So you don't want to do that. We also printed off pens with a number on and post-it notes that could be left around the offices. Everyone loves a post-it note. We got the Speak Up helpline details added to the homepage of the intranet and also the Royal Mail app, which is available to anyone on a mobile phone. So it's reaching out to people who don't have their own work laptop. Now, that might sound obvious, but if you can't find the details easily, you can't make a report and you may well give up. If you haven't saved that email that you received, or the poster in your site with the details on is in the kitchen and you don't want people to see you scanning the QR code, you need to know where to get those details. So the homepage is a great place to put it. We've also done a couple of really good things. First of all, added the details to payslips. So everyone in the company has a payslip. So it's a great way to reach everyone who does open their payslip. I have to say, I don't always open mine. And we now get those details added once a quarter. So we're constantly reminding people about the details. And another really good one was we worked with IT to develop a screensaver. So you go away, you make a cup of tea, you come back, and there's a screensaver with the Speak Up details on. A really effective way of drip feeding the message to people. Now, one big issue that we had, which I've touched on, was the old details being on the intranet. And unfortunately, the intranet in Royal Mail is a little bit like the Wild West. There's very few controls on who can add content. There's no version control. There's no requirement to review pages to keep them up to date, etc. So there are a huge number of references to the old details across the intranet, which was obviously very unhelpful. And we had it flagged to us a few times by people. It was also included, the old details also included in policies and guidance documents. At one point, the policy template had a reference to the Speak Up details. So all of those needed updating. That's more straightforward. You simply identify the policy owner and get them to update the details. So no big deal there. But the intranet was more difficult, and it could have been a full-time job to change all of those references. So we took a pragmatic decision. We searched for the old helpline details and updated or deleted the first 2 pages of results. Lesson there for everybody is going forwards is to have one intranet page about Speak Up that's got the up-to-date Speak Up details on. And then if anyone else is referring to it, rather than typing out the details on their page or in their article, they put a link to that Speak Up page. So then if the intranet, the Speak Up details get updated, you simply update that one page and those links still remain valid. So much easier than trying to sort of retrospectively update everything. So that's how we communicated details. Jamie, any questions so far?
I just wanted to quickly run through the poll results.
Yes, sorry.
So 12% felt they were very satisfied, and 48% were somewhat satisfied, which was the highest result. And 34% felt they should be getting more reports. 4% felt they should be getting a lot more reports, and 2% don't have a Speak Up process. And just finally, on the previous question. It was, what would you consider the most successful route that we chose?
I would say, if I just go back to that slide, definitely the screensaver, because the people who've got laptops are then seeing that message all the time. So it's really kind of drumming it into them. And then in terms of operational colleagues, I would say the posters, posters are very old school, but they are effective. I went to a site recently and I could see the speak up posters everywhere. The classic thing is to put them on the back of the toilet door so that people can look at the details in privacy. And so I think that's good. And I think using the plasma screens as well is a really effective way of getting the message out there. Shall I move on? So now we're going to look at what we did to increase transparency and understanding about the end-to-end process. And this is really important. A lack of transparency can create a lack of trust in the process, which then stops people making those reports in the first place. So as I said before, there was a good awareness that the helpline existed, but the process, as far as I could tell, had never been set out in detail. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did was update the policy, obviously with the new speak up details, but also we put in much more detail about the process from start to finish. So what sort of reports should be made to the helpline and which should not? That's actually very important. There are alternative channels that you need to use. For example, bullying and harassment has its own reporting channel. Who will look at your report? How will it be triaged? Who will investigate it? And what feedback should you expect? Now, this adding extra detail does go against the trend of policy simplification by making things longer rather than shorter. And this is a process that we've been going through at Royal Mail. And I did actually have to have a bit of an argument with it about it with the policy team, because to me, it was really important that if someone makes the effort to look at the policy, we want them to have all of the information they need to decide whether they're going to make a report in one place, rather than expecting them to look for further detail elsewhere. So that builds trust, but it also manages people's expectations. So one example is that lots of people expect to receive the full details about the outcome of their report, or even see the investigation report, and that is usually not appropriate. So I use a police analogy. If you imagine you saw an attack on an individual in the street and you report that as a witness to the police, you are not entitled to know everything about that case just because you reported it. So we set that out up front, and it helps people to know what to expect. Another key change to the policy was to make it absolutely crystal clear that retaliation and detriment of any kind is not acceptable in any situation. Again, very obvious, but it really needed spelling out. And we know from our culture survey results that fear of retaliation is a key reason for not speaking up. And 29% of respondents to our last survey said that it would stop them reporting an issue. And I heard a true story recently on a webinar about speaking up. So apologies if you've heard this, but it's really powerful in my opinion. So this was a reporter at a big company. They've made a report about something and they experienced some retaliation of some sort. And the stress of that retaliation actually made the reporter suffer a heart attack. Now that in itself is bad enough, but it gets worse. The son of that reporter, who then could see that his father was in hospital and was concerned that if his father couldn't work, the son would then have to change schools. He wouldn't be able to continue where he was currently at school. And so that led the son to try and take his own life. Absolutely devastating. And it really brings home to you that you can't underestimate the unexpected consequences of retaliation. That's why we absolutely cannot tolerate it, and we need to stamp down on it very hard. The second thing that we've done is we've significantly increased the amount and type of communications that we issue about the process. So again, we know from our ethical culture survey that concerns around confidentiality stop 30% of people from reporting a concern. So we had to combat that. And actually having a new platform has been very helpful in that sense. So we can really emphasize the strict controls on access to the platform. There's very few super users. It's basically my team and one person in internal audit. Investigators only see what they need to see. They don't have full access to the platform. Everything is done through the platform, so that really increases security. Neither Royal Mail nor the platform are tracking any kind of information that can be used to identify you, such as an IP address. And we can still communicate with reporters, even if they're anonymous. So that kind of information is really, really helpful to increase confidence in the confidentiality and the security of the system. We've also done an infographic, which sets out the process in more detail in a more visual format, because obviously some people prefer learning through visual ways rather than reading about stuff. We've done some FAQs about the sorts of concerns that we think a reporter might be having before they make a report. So what if I don't have any evidence? What if I'm not sure what I saw? What if I got it wrong? Will there be any repercussions for me? And the idea is to just support them through that process so that they can feel comfortable making that report. We also now publish statistics every quarter. Again, our culture survey tells us that 18% of people wouldn't report something as they believe nothing would be done. So we now publish the number of reports in that quarter, the anonymous reporting rate, and the substantiation rate of reports for that quarter. And we publish a few anonymized cases where a report has been upheld and action has been taken. And that's really important so that we can demonstrate that when we get a report, we do listen and we do take action. Another good one was a Courier article. Again, the internal newspaper that I said was aimed at our operational colleagues. I don't think most people get this, but it was a big one-page spread, had a lovely photo of me, and it was called The Only Way is Ethics. Now, I checked before the session, and I don't think The Only Way is Essex has crossed the Atlantic, which is a real shame, because if it had, you would realise that then is an excellent play on words. I can't take credit for it myself, but we do use that one a lot. It's very good. We've also set up our own compliance and ethics workplace group. So for those of you who don't know, workplace is very similar to Facebook, but it's used for a work context. So we use workplace a lot. It's a very quick, simple way to get messages across. It's accessible by everyone who's got a phone, basically. So we can use that to get messages to everyone in the business, everyone who's signed up to it. Now, another really good change that I'm really pleased about is that we now give reporters a lot more feedback than we were previously. What they used to get at the end of a report investigation was simply to be told, your report is now closed, and if appropriate, actions have been put in place. Now, obviously, that is totally unsatisfactory to a reporter. You've made the effort to report something, which in itself should not be underestimated, but you don't even know if it's been upheld. So why would you bother next time? And I totally agree with that. So we engage with the legal team. And as you won't be surprised to hear that the lawyers were a little bit risk averse, and I can say that because I'm a lawyer. But they initially had concerns about more detailed feedback being used against the company, for example, in an employment tribunal. But we did eventually manage to convince them that this is the right thing to do. And one important part in that argument was showing that other companies do this for their Speak Up report, and we're not having issues with it. So we've agreed some template wordings with legal. So now when a reporter makes their report and it's closed, they get a standard response saying, thanking them for making their report. They will then be told whether their report has been upheld or not, and the reason for that decision. So was it a lack of evidence, for example? If it's not upheld, we say that it doesn't mean that their report was not true, but simply there was insufficient evidence. And then they are invited to provide more evidence if they have it. And we would reopen the investigation at that point if they did manage to provide us with more evidence. If it is upheld, where we can, we will then give details about remedial actions that have been put in place. But obviously, we cannot share personal details about an individual, such as whether they've been dismissed, whether they've been through the conduct process. And I know a lot of people do find that frustrating, but we've got to respect the privacy of those individuals. So things that we might share include if there was a change to a process, for example, if something wasn't working, or if a team have been given some training on a particular issue, such as diversity training. So from my point of view, that's a much better process for reporters than it was previously. And we've not had any issues with providing that extra level of detail. So those 3 points relate to increasing transparency across the business. But a very recent change we've made is increasing transparency for the board and for the Speak Up team ourselves. So as I said, the new platform provides a lot more detail, and we are using that detail and that data to much better effect. So we still report quarterly on the number of reports we've received, anonymous reporting rates, substantiation rates, types of reports, all of that good stuff, and that's still important. But we are now looking at every single step of the process to monitor performance and quickly identify, are there any backlogs? Are there areas where we need additional resource? So one example we had was I had a concern that given the number of reports has increased dramatically, most of those reports are HR reports. Did HR have enough resource to complete investigations in a timely manner and to a sufficiently high standard? And what the data told us was that, yes, currently we are not seeing investigation times increase, which I thought they might do, but actually we need more resource in the Speak Up team to review the investigation reports as they come in in a timely manner. So we only got that insight by looking at the data differently. Another issue that we were able to expose was that initial response times to the reporter. So they get an automated response when they put something in online, but then someone in the Speak Up team will look at the report and then triage it and either go back to them saying we need more information, or it's been allocated for investigation, whatever the case may be. But those initial response times were getting longer. And so through the reporting that we did, we were able to identify that and then really focus on those and bring those response times back down to a much more satisfactory level. And in fact, because we've got that focus, most people will receive a response within sort of 24 hours of making their report, which is obviously a lot better. Top tip at this point, so make sure you test your helpline regularly, doing some mystery shopper, making some fake reports. We discovered that despite being told that the phone line was working when the new platform launched, it actually wasn't. And we weren't aware of that until someone told the CEO about it 7 days later. So that's obviously not great. So now we do regular mystery shopping exercises to test things, that things are working properly. Are there any issues? We then feed those back to the supplier to make sure that they are being addressed. So it's a great way of seeing how things are working in practice, but also keeping the supplier on their toes. So Jamin, any questions before we move on? Oh, are you on mute?
We have one. Yeah, sorry. We have one from Kimberly saying, "Are you willing to share what system you are using to track your hotline calls and investigations?"
Yes, I think it's probably common knowledge. So we use GAN Integrity. So we did have a few teething problems, but actually they've been very good. They're very responsive and work with us to really get the system exactly how we want it. Okay, so let's move on. So the next one, this is a biggie, changing culture. And this is not a quick fix. It's like turning the Titanic, but there are small things that you can do that can make a difference, I think. So what did we do? So I think the first thing to think about when you're talking about culture is to think about what language you're using when you're talking about speaking up. So the first thing that I did was ban the term whistleblower and whistleblowing. To me, they can have really negative connotations, when you think about whistleblowers being retaliated against, targeted, vilified in the press, and even sent to prison in some cases. And you do not want people thinking about that when they're considering making a report. So all language that you use needs to be positive. So we talk about reporters, not whistleblowers. We talk about speaking up, and we don't even say hotline anymore, which I know a lot of companies do. But to me, you would use a hotline in an emergency, and you would use it to report something really serious. And it makes me think of the bat phone, if you remember that from the Batman and Robin series from the 60s. So we don't position our helpline like that. We position it as a way of reporting anything that's concerning you, whether it's big or small. If it's important to you, it's important to us. And I haven't yet convinced the board to stop calling it whistleblowing, but I am working on it. The other thing that we do is we don't talk about it as a duty or an obligation. You will sometimes see that in policies, for example, that it's your duty to speak up if you see something. I don't think that's realistic. People will speak up because they want to improve things or because something is bugging them, rather than because a policy or a code of conduct says that they have to. And you have to remember, it takes a lot of courage to put your head above the parapet. You might even be worried that you'll lose your job. So you've got to tap into what will make people risk doing that, what will make them take that risk and to speak up. So the classic question is, what's in it for me? So we talk about the positive value of all reports. So every report tells us something. It gives us information about what's going on in the business. It's an opportunity to improve how we do things. Importantly, it's not just about benefiting Royal Mail and protecting Royal Mail. So yes, a report might lead to Royal Mail stopping doing something that otherwise could lead to us being fined or otherwise getting in trouble. And yes, we got a lot of those types of reports during lockdown where COVID-related safety procedures weren't always being implemented. But it was more about protecting our colleagues and keeping everyone safe rather than preventing Royal Mail getting fined. So we talk about making a report as an opportunity to improve your immediate work environment and your team culture. It's about doing the right thing and feeling good about it. So take a scenario, if someone in your team is racist or sexist, they're making inappropriate comments, by reporting that, you can improve your own working life because you don't have to put up with it anymore. And you're improving the lives of your colleagues because they don't have to put up with it anymore. So we try and make it personal. We make it about protecting your colleagues, and we try and make it emotional. And I think that's a much more powerful message than simply saying you're protecting Royal Mail. We also talk about the psychology behind speaking up and why that might stop someone speaking up. So, for example, there is a great quote from Quentin Tarantino in a press interview about Harvey Weinstein, where he said, "I knew enough to do more than I did." Now, that's classic bystander effect. You've got a group of people, in this case, Hollywood stars. They're witnessing something that they know is not right, but because there's a group of them, they are less likely to speak up about it because they think someone else will do it. They're abdicating their responsibility, if you like. Or they don't want to be ostracized for speaking up when they look around and they see that no one else is speaking up. And apparently being ostracized by a group activates the same part of the brain as physical pain. So the fundamental human need to be liked means that we don't like calling out bad behavior due to a fear of rejection. So that's all very interesting, but by calling out those things, we can help people recognize them and hopefully then overcome them. So we give practical tips to the business, including imagine if someone is suffering some sort of abuse. Imagine if they were a member of your family. How would you like someone to help them? You would hope that someone would stand up for them and speak up about it. Also, practice speaking up is a really good one. It doesn't have to be about anything big. Maybe you don't like the coffee in your local office. It could be asking why you're doing something in your team that you don't understand or don't think is a good idea. Or you can ask to have a 5-minute break during a 3-hour meeting, and I've done that one. If you're used to raising small concerns, then you're more comfortable if you have to raise a big concern down the line. Now, interestingly, and this is why I like culture so much, it's not just team culture that's important, and it's not just company culture that's important, and that can affect speak up, but it's also national culture. So to demonstrate that, if I asked this audience who had spoken up in a restaurant about poor service or bad food, a lot of you will put your hand up and you'd be perfectly happy with that and be very comfortable doing that. But I can guarantee you that there would be lots of British people who wouldn't do that, as it is very British not to complain. So we have an expression, snitches get stitches, but that goes all the way back to school, where we're told not to tell tales on people. In other cultures, that kind of speaking up is much more common and it's not a big deal. So we can see that very clearly actually in the benchmark reports that we use, where you've got reporting levels across different parts of the world. The UK benchmark is 0.5 reports per 100 employees versus North America, where it's 1.5 reports per 100 employees. So you can see that that cultural element is really, really important. And that obviously just makes it that a little bit more difficult to create that speak up culture in your own company. We've also moved away from talking about misconduct. I said before that was the kind of emphasis of and the purpose of the Speak Up helpline. We're now also interested in unethical behaviour. That may not necessarily be a breach of policy, but nevertheless, it's concerning and we want to know about it. And also, people may not know whether something counts as misconduct or not, but we still want them to report it. So we talk about concerns, which is wide enough to cover everything, basically. So the second big area that we focused on is around promoting the wider benefits of a strong culture generally. And again, it's about promoting the personal benefits to you as an individual, as well as the benefits for the company. Yes, a strong culture might stop Royal Mail getting in trouble, but it also increases employee engagement and motivation. It increases trust with our colleagues. It increases productivity, and ultimately, it benefits the bottom line. So if a company is doing well, its employees will do well. So it's a win-win situation. And again, it's about repeating these messages over and over again so that people get used to hearing those things and start to take it as read. That's just how we do things around here. So one thing I try and do is a weekly post on Workplace about something I've read or I've heard on a webinar or something that's happened recently, just to try and bring these things to life and make it practical and real life, rather than this sort of waffly concept of ethics, which is quite difficult to understand sometimes and see how that applies to you in your day job. So it's just about plugging that message over and over again that culture is so important and that speaking up is a critical part of that. Finally, the last thing that we are doing is actively measuring our company's ethical culture to get an understanding of what people are feeling and what they're thinking. So, and Jamie was actually a key part of this. We did a big survey in June 21, which had a lot of detailed questions in it. And then we've done a pulse survey in February of this year with just 10 questions. So we can track movement on the key elements of ethical culture. So there's a couple of questions on speaking up, there's one on organizational justice, there's one on tone from the top, etc. So if you are not doing anything like this at the moment, I would really recommend it, as it gives you some really useful information. So for example, because of the training that I'm going to come and talk about in a minute about speaking up, our scores for knowing how to report concerns and how to deal with them are really high, but our scores for tone at the top are not so good. So that's where we're going to focus our efforts this year. We've seen the results of speaking up. Let's move on to tone from the top. And we wouldn't necessarily know that if we hadn't done that survey. It doesn't need to be anything complicated. We are very lucky. Royal Mail uses an internal system which allows us to send the survey out to thousands of people. It's completely anonymous. You can then use it to analyze the results. But you can just send a survey out on Microsoft Forms, for example, or SurveyMonkey. Key things are: one, make it anonymous, so you get an honest opinion. Two, don't tie it to anything else, like bonus, for example. Again, that will affect the results if you do that. And then three, make sure you are very visible with the follow-up. And that's really important. This is one of the comments that we got, that people didn't think we would do anything with the results. So you've got to publicize the results when you get them. You've then got to look at those results, and we have free text boxes so people can put comments in. So we review all of those comments, identify actions, and then publicize the steps that you've taken to implement those actions. Otherwise, people feel it's just a tick box activity, and next time they won't be bothered to participate. So what we did was break down the results into 8 pillars of an ethical culture. We did a post on Workplace for each one so that everyone can see the results. We've used the comments to come up with an action plan, and then we've published regular updates on what we've implemented. So people know that we are taking it seriously. We're not just doing this as a tick box exercise. We are genuinely interested in what people have got to say. And we then have a session with the senior leadership team for each business unit across the business to then talk them through their results, so they can all see that their results as they relate to them as a team, rather than just at the Royal Mail level. Now, an important part of changing culture is to ensure you've got that senior leader buy-in and support. And we've tried to do that in several ways. So the training that I will come on to was supported by messaging from the senior leader. Soon after the training came out in April, we held what was called a Compliance and Ethics Academy. And that was attended by about 25 senior leaders from across the business to talk them through our compliance and ethics strategy, which included improving the speak up culture, to make sure they understood it, they were on board with it, and they could see what we're trying to achieve. We have a compliance and ethics network of what we call champions from each business unit. So basically, the Royal Mail business is too big for us in my little team to try and do everything we need to do. So we have these champions across the business who support us in what we need to do. And so we have expanded their role to go from simply completing an attestation every 6 months to say, yes, training's updated, up to date in my team, policies have rolled out, I've escalated any issues, etc., to actively requiring them to help us build a strong culture in their team. So we ask them to send out a certain number of communications on compliance ethics issues every year in their name. And that's important. That's setting tone from the top. An email from your boss is going to have more impact than an email from someone in compliance that you don't necessarily know who they are. And we ask them to commit to having at least one face-to-face training session a year, because that, again, increases engagement rather than an online training that goes out to the entire business. And we ask that they have 2 discussions or conversations about a compliance ethics issue that's relevant for their team every year. So that is very new. That came in last year, but it's generally been very well received, and those champions are generally very supportive of it. So again, I'm going to pause there. Any questions, Jamin?
Yeah, so Karen, if you jump to, we've got a question from Michael here who says, does your supplier handle all calls and forward to you, or does your team answer the calls?
So with GAN Integrity, they outsource their helpline to a company in Canada. So they answer the helpline, the outsourced provider answer the phone line for us. And the way it works is that we spent a long time configuring the online platform, all of the questions that we ask people to, we want people to answer, the order of those, the options that we give them. And so basically the phone line operators will just run through those questions, but on the phone line as well. And what they will do is type in the report essentially onto the same platform that someone would use if they went onto the online website themselves. So, and then all of those reports get sent automatically to the Speak Up team. We will get an email every time someone's made a report, and we then go in and review it.
I've got a couple more things just to deal with on the chat side. GAN Integrity is the provider of our Speak Up helpline for those who are asking. I've typed that into the chat, so feel free to scroll up to that comment there. From Stacey, it says, does your survey focus on a particular leadership level? I'm happy to answer that one, Karen. So we have 10,000 people online using laptops. It covers senior managers, exec board members, managers, admin staff, and so basically everyone is covered. The idea behind the survey is that it's confidential, so we can still break up the answers by that, so we can understand how senior leadership perceive the culture, how senior managers perceive the culture, how admins perceive the culture, and measure them against each other. And what we can't do is pick out what individual board members or senior managers do on an individual level, and that's the confidential / anonymous part. So thanks for your question there. I also have a question from Will. I used to take hotline calls and found callers mostly fearful of retaliation. Do you direct your hotline operators to say something to callers when they express fear of retaliation? Are you happy to jump on that one, Karen?
Yeah, so the way that it works is that we will ask the question, are you happy to disclose your details? So you can either say, no, I want to be anonymous. Yes, I'm happy to disclose my details, but I don't want them shared with anyone else without my permission. Or yes, I'm happy to share them and I'm happy for them to be shared in the investigation. So we protect the reporter at that point. We do ask, one of the standard questions is, are you fearful of retaliation? So people will say yes or no. If they say they want to be anonymous, we ask them why, and the answer is inevitably fear of retaliation. I will come on to something that we've literally launched last week around how we are monitoring retaliation. So I won't give that away just yet. I'll come on to that. So I will cover that, I promise.
I just have, sorry, Karen, I've got one more question. So I've got a question from Kimberly around compliance training vendors, or do you create in-house? So our Speak Up eLearning that we created in-house, I built it using Articulate Storyline. For those who haven't used it, it's a program you can buy for about £1,000, so what, $1,400. It's essentially a heavyweight PowerPoint that does all the heavy lifting for you, and means that you can just create an online learning that you can upload to your learning management systems, but means that can be tailored to you exactly how you want it to. I'll leave the details of that in the chat. And I also had just wanted to clarify our survey tool was Qualtrics. Again, I'll leave a little bit of a review in the chat. Yeah, that's very easy to use. You get fantastic analytics out the back end, and it has a ready-made anonymous confidential profiling thing that you just tick a box in the back end that makes sure that you can't see anyone's results. So I'll cover that all in the chat whilst Karen progresses into the next section.
Great. Well, the next thing actually is to launch the second poll, Jamin, if we can.
Sorry, thank you. The second poll is ready for everyone to complete. So I'll give you guys 30 seconds to do that. Whilst you're doing that, I'm just actually going to talk about Qualtrics. So that was our survey tool that we used. The analytics are very good off the back end. I've just typed that into the chat now so that people can Google that name afterwards. And I've got, well, sorry, one more question for you, Karen, whilst people are filling in the poll. For those who choose, this is from Michael, for those who choose to remain anonymous, can you share how often they follow up to find about their case?
And that is a really good question. I don't have the statistic in front of me, but very often we find with anonymous reports that people don't provide enough information. And so because we can use the platform to communicate with them, we will go back to them with a message that says, we need more information. We can't investigate without more information. And the percentage of reporters that do log back into the system is pretty low. I would think it's probably around 30 to 40%. So unfortunately, those, that's a big chunk of reports that we can't investigate because we don't have enough information. So whether that is just a lack of engagement with someone, they kind of think, well, I've made the report, I'm not interested in the outcome. That could be it. Maybe they don't understand the process that they've got to log back in to get that update. We obviously do tell people repeatedly that they need to do that, but yeah, it is something that we see very regularly, that people make an anonymous report and then we never hear back from them again. But I'm going to crack on. Have you got the results,
yes,
Jamie?
Yes, I do. So the question is, do you currently provide training for managers around speaking up? 18% say no, and 57% say it's wrapped into their annual training / code of conduct, and 25% say they provide training dedicated to speaking up.
Okay, so that's really interesting, and I think again that's similar to where we were before, although I'm not even sure it was covered in our code of conduct training, to be honest. So the problem that we had in Royal Mail was that we've got these line managers, people are reporting concerns to them, but there was nothing to teach them how to deal with them. And we've talked about how fundamental it is that gets dealt with properly. So we developed a short 15-minute e-learning module. It was mandatory for managers to help them have conversations with their direct reports. And we did a version for direct people who had direct reports and those that didn't, to make it particularly relevant. To go along with that, we also developed a manager's guide, which covered the topics in more detail so people can reference that at their leisure. We developed a guide on psychological safety. I will mention that in a minute. And we also mentioned what we call an ethical toolkit. And the aim of that is to help managers have a conversation with their team about ethical issues, which may not be outside of their comfort zone, but it may be outside of their comfort zone. It might not be something that they're used to doing. So we've got ethical dilemma scenarios, one slide with a scenario, different options. We have ethics moments, which are short 2-minute videos that you can play at a team meeting about real life scenarios like the Boeing air crashes. We've got role play scenarios that you can run through. And we're just about to launch what we're calling ethics in action. And we've had a really great example in the UK recently where a Premier League footballer was filmed kicking his cats, and that went viral. So obviously not great from his point of view. But what was really interesting was the reaction of his club and the club sponsors. So the club fined him £250,000, which sounds like a lot of money until you realise he's earning £125,000 a week. But the club allowed him to play in their next match. By contrast, the club sponsor immediately ended their relationship with the club, as they said they were hugely disappointed with its response. So not good for the cats, but a really good case study for anyone who's interested in that. And the idea is that you just have a couple of slides setting the scene and then invite a discussion about the sorts of factors that people would be thinking about in that situation. And then finally, we've just done a follow-up survey to the to the training, and I will come on to that in a second. So what did we include in the e-learning? So I said it was about 15 to 20 minutes long, and it was meant to be very practical, lots of examples and tips. We used animation, voiceover, scenarios, and interaction to make it engaging. So the first thing is we talked about the benefits of a strong culture, so I won't go over that again. We then talked about how to promote the right culture in your team, and this had a big focus on psychological safety, where people feel safe to voice their opinions, raise concerns, ask questions, and challenge what we're doing. And they know that they'll be taken seriously and not ridiculed. And that creates a really positive environment of learning, engagement, and innovation, but also it supports a speak up culture, because if you're used to asking questions and challenging things in your team, then it's just how you do things, and it's much easier then to speak up if you have got a concern. We also touched on ethical decision making. We gave people a series of questions to ask themselves so that they can make the right decision in any situation, because obviously our guidance documents can't cover every single situation that might arise. We then talked about the importance of speak up, listen up, and follow up. You may have heard this before. So the individual has to do the speaking up, the manager has the responsibility to listen up, and it's the company's responsibility to follow up to make any necessary changes. So for a manager, they need to be able to recognise when someone is making a report. So they may not come into their office and say, actually, I want to report a concern. They might say something like, I'm not sure what to do about this, or I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but. So it's recognising that language and thinking, actually, someone's trying to make a report here, I need to switch myself on. They've also got to know how to take that report. So give the person your full attention, make sure you've got plenty of time, ask lots of questions, think about your body language. Are you maintaining eye contact? Are you face to face with them? And then reassuring the person that you will treat this as confidential. All of these things on their own are critical and maybe obvious, but a manager may not have put it all together before, may not have thought about it before. So it's important as well for managers to feed back to a reporter what they've done, so that people understand that they've been heard and action has been taken. Sometimes the manager can't do anything about it themselves, so they need to know where to escalate an issue to. And again, this has not been done clearly in one place before, so we've included that in the training and the guidance. We had a section on retaliation and detriment, and it's around educating people that, you know, it's not just the obvious things like someone getting sacked or demoted, but it's subtle behaviours where you just change your behaviour slightly. So not inviting a reporter to a social event, for example, at work, or not asking their opinion about something at work that you would have done before. And of course, the training makes it clear that any form of detriment is not acceptable. And it needs to be reported. If it's not reported, we can't investigate it and we can't take action. And at the bottom, you can see how we try to bring a bit of behavioural science into it. So behavioural science says if you have to do an action when you're signing up to something, you are more likely to actually do it. So we've got people to tick each of the boxes to say that they would commit to behaving like that. This is, I won't go through this, but this is a practical scenario. So we have a scenario, we then give you, show you how to handle it badly and how to handle it well, to try and bring it alive and make it easier for people to absorb that information. So this is a bit of information about the feedback that we got. Overall, this is the most successful training we've done so far in my team. It scored 4.4 out of 5 when we asked for feedback. And if you look at the graph on the right, the blue line is the completion rate you need to complete the training on time, and the red line is the actual completion rate. And you can see that the red line is above the blue line for most of it, which means people were keen to complete it, and we had to do very little training to meet our target of 95% completion rate. And I think last time I looked, we're now at 99.7, which is fantastic considering we stopped chasing it once we get to 95%. We got 2,300 comments, only a handful of which were negative. Some were about complaining about my tone of voice doing the voiceover, so I try not to take that personally. But for people to take the time to make those comments is really good when you think about how busy everyone is. We got 1,400 clicks on related materials during the completion window on things like the policy, etc. So what all this tells me is that the training was very successful, and it's really seemed to hit a chord with people. So lessons that we've learned, only 25 people out of 9,300 rated it as 1 or 2 stars. I think that's amazing. The main criticism about it being a tick box exercise, I think, says more about the culture of Royal Mail at that point than the training itself. And I think the cynicism may be explained by the fact that this was the first time we've done anything like this, and so people may have been mistrustful. So to deal with that, we've made sure that we've followed up with consistent messaging, which I've talked about. And one really good thing that we've done is launch our Compliance and Ethics Stars recognition program, where you can nominate someone for doing the right thing. They then receive an email saying, well done, you've been nominated, copied into their line manager. And we know it works because someone who received a nomination then nominated someone else an hour later. So, you know, it's a good way of spreading good news stories. Other things are around developing hard materials that can support the training. So, for example, we made an ethical decision-making poster. We're looking at how we can develop classroom materials that can be shared, particularly on the operational front line. And then we did the original culture survey 2 months after the e-learning, and the results I said before about how to speak up and how to deal with concerns was very positive. In the follow-up survey in February, those results had dropped slightly. And so we're now going to repeat the training every 2 years. We were originally going to make it a one-off thing. So what's the impact of this activity? I won't go through these, the slides are available, but these are some of the things that people fed into feedback about how things that they've taken away. Results of the follow-up survey that we did just nearly a year after the survey, the original training went out. And you can see the results are very, very positive. So 37% of people said they changed how they engage with their team. And that's really fantastic that a year later, we've got that many people who are still doing things differently. And you can see people feel more confident dealing with concerns and what retaliation is. So overall, the training was a great success. So what other changes have we seen? Well, reports are up by 82% compared to last year. And March had our highest ever reporting level. Our anonymous reports are down. And again, that's a fantastic result. We still have a bit of a way to go to get those to benchmark levels, but they are on a downward trajectory. And our substantiation rates have gone up. And that may be to do because we're now getting better quality reports because people have a better understanding of what sort of things they should be reporting. So I've got about 1 minute left. So I'll quickly talk about, the thing that I promised I was going to talk about, our anti-retaliation monitoring process. So we are building into our triage process some retaliation red flags to identify people who are at higher risk of retaliation. So are they in a small team? Are they reporting about their manager? Have they told other people they're going to report to speak up? And where those red flags exist, we are then putting in place a monitoring process for the reporter. So we will check in with them at regular details for 12 months. And that's really important. You think about an annual performance review, for example, that could happen 12 months after a report is made. So, and that will be a follow-up conversation, a phone conversation to get people to sort of open up. Have you experienced anything, any sort of changes of behaviour? Second thing is more regular updates to reporters. We couldn't do that previously due to a lack of resource. So you heard from our team at the beginning and at the end of the report. Now we're going to be able to hopefully provide monthly updates, even if it's just to say investigation is still ongoing. That still reassures people that it hasn't just gone into a black hole. And then we are going to be encouraging reports from all demographics. Our new portal allows us to ask questions about ethnicity, gender, etc. And so we need to look at those results and make sure that all groups across the business are using the Speak Up helpline. You know, if they're not, is it a lack of awareness? Is it English is not their first language? So we need to do a little bit more work about identifying if there are groups that are not using it as in the same way as everyone else, and make sure that we can then serve those people in the same way. So to sum up, 3 key takeaways, always have 3 key takeaways, and I can sum them up with 3 words: culture, transparency, and managers, supporting your managers. So we've run out of time, so I don't think we have time to do any Q&A, but we did try and cover any questions as we went along. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today, and I hope you found that interesting and you've learned 1 or 2 things. So we will finish there. Thank you very much.